Nobody believed he would actually do it. That was the miscalculation that changed everything. Every government, every regulator, every senior official inside the European Commission had built their entire strategy around a single assumption that had held true without a single exception across 20 years of battles between Brussels and American technology companies. That when the pressure became serious enough, when the fines became large enough, when the threat of market exclusion became real enough, the CEO would blink. They would negotiate. They would comply. They always complied, because the European market was too large and too wealthy for any rational business leader to walk away from over a matter of principle. Ursula von der Leyen had enforced that assumption against Google, against Apple, against Meta, and she had won every single time. So when her team constructed what they internally described as an inescapable legal trap around Elon Musk and X, the outcome felt like a formality. What they did not understand, what they had catastrophically failed to account for, was that Elon Musk had spent 7 months quietly building something in the dark that would not just defeat their strategy, it would dismantle the entire foundation their regulatory power had always rested on. And when 3 words went out at 3 a.m. California time, 340 million Europeans went to sleep on a social media platform and woke up to find themselves permanently, irreversibly deleted from it. Brussels had no response, because Brussels had never once prepared for the possibility that someone would simply refuse to need them. To understand the full scale of what Elon Musk just executed, you have to understand what Ursula von der Leyen had built and why she believed it was untouchable. Because the European Commission's power over American technology companies was not theoretical. It was not diplomatic pressure dressed up in legal language. It was a genuine and repeatedly demonstrated capacity to force the most powerful corporations on Earth to change their behavior, restructure their operations, and pay enormous financial penalties without any of them ever successfully resisting long enough to matter. The track record was real and it was impressive. Over 8 billion euros extracted from Google across a series of antitrust cases that forced the company to restructure how it operated across every European market. Apple compelled to dismantle and rebuild its entire App Store payment architecture in Europe at a cost running into billions of annual revenue, a humiliation that landed directly on Tim Cook in front of his own board. Meta forced to tear down its European data collection infrastructure and reconstruct it from scratch according to Brussels specifications, a process that consumed hundreds of millions of dollars and years of engineering time. The pattern across every single one of these confrontations was identical in its essential shape. The American technology giant would resist initially. There would be loud public statements about regulatory overreach and government interference with innovation. Legal teams would file challenges, executives would give interviews expressing outrage, and then, without a single exception across the entire history of the EU's technology enforcement program, they would return to the table. They would pay, they would adapt. They would find a path to compliance because the alternative, genuine exclusion from a market of 450 million of the wealthiest consumers on the planet, was a form of financial self-destruction that no CEO could justify to the people whose capital they were responsible for managing. The EU's leverage was not complicated. It rested on one foundational reality. Europe was too large and too rich to abandon for any reason that a board of directors or a shareholder meeting would accept as rational. Von der Leyen had deployed that reality as a weapon so consistently and so successfully that it had stopped feeling like a strategic tool and started feeling like a permanent feature of the landscape, an immovable law of commercial physics that applied universally and without exception. That certainty is what led her team to approach the case against Musk with the same methodical confidence they brought to every previous engagement. The European Commission spent 22 months constructing their case. The documentation ran to 2,400 pages. 847 specific violations of the Digital Services Act were cataloged with supporting evidence. 312 independent researchers provided testimony regarding systematic obstruction of their mandated access to platform data. Thousands of content examples were compiled, classified, cross-referenced, and verified as evidence of what Brussels formally characterized as a deliberate and systematic disinformation operation that posed a documented threat to democratic processes across multiple EU member states. Every argument had been stress-tested. Every legal claim had been reviewed by the Commission's most senior lawyers. Every conceivable counter-argument had been anticipated and addressed. This was not a hasty political operation. It was a comprehensively engineered legal siege that had been constructed over nearly 2 years with the explicit intention of being completely unbeatable in any European judicial forum. When it was complete, the punishment architecture von der Leyen's team assembled was designed to make resistance not just difficult but mathematically irrational. An immediate €20 million fine for deceptive practices related to X's verification system. Formal charges designating the platform an institutional threat to European democratic stability, escalating daily financial penalties for continued non-compliance with researcher data access requirements, and then the weapon that was supposed to make full and unconditional surrender the only logical outcome, a 30-day ultimatum. Comply with a single non-negotiable demand or face permanent removal from every app store across all 27 EU member states simultaneously. The demand itself was the part that Musk would never accept, and von der Leyen's team knew it. That was precisely why they chose it. They believed that by making the demand maximally offensive to everything Musk had built X to represent, they would force him into a public confrontation that he could only escape by eventually backing down, because the financial cost of not backing down was simply too large for any owner to absorb indefinitely. The demand was the installation of EU-approved content moderators inside X's San Francisco headquarters, not consultants, not advisors whose recommendations could be acknowledged and quietly set aside, officials with genuine legally enforceable authority to remove content, suspend accounts, and directly control what 340 million European users were permitted to see, read, and share on the platform every single day. In its operational reality, Brussels was demanding that Musk surrender editorial control of X's European speech environment to government-appointed bureaucrats. Von der Leyen had made this calculation before. The CEO would rage publicly. There would be posts about tyranny and censorship that generated enormous engagement and changed nothing legally. Lawyers would request meetings. Months would pass. And eventually, as the financial pressure accumulated and the board grew nervous and the investors started asking uncomfortable questions, compliance would arrive in some form that allowed both sides to claim a version of victory. She had played this game many times. She knew how it ended. What she had never encountered across the entire history of her regulatory career was a technology company with no board capable of overruling its owner, no outside shareholders in a position to threaten legal action over destroyed company value, no institutional investors who could withdraw funding if principle was prioritized over profit. Musk owned X completely and without constraint, and he had used the 7 months between the ultimatum and the deadline not to prepare a negotiating position, but to prepare something else entirely, something that had been built in total secrecy, rehearsed with military precision, and engineered to demonstrate one thing above everything else: that the European Commission's power over American technology companies had never been absolute authority. It had always been conditional consent. And Musk had just decided to withdraw his consent permanently and in the most public and irreversible way the digital world had ever witnessed. At exactly 3:17 in the morning California time on December 8, 2025, while Ursula von der Leyen slept in Brussels with no idea that everything she had built over a decade of regulatory dominance was about to be taken apart with surgical precision, Elon Musk sent an encrypted message to exactly 14 people. There were no pleasantries in that message, no strategic discussion, no request for final input or last-minute confirmation. 3 words: execute protocol severance. Every one of those 14 people knew exactly what those 3 words meant, because they had been preparing for this moment for 7 months with the kind of obsessive, disciplined secrecy that does not leak because the people involved understand completely what is at stake and have been selected specifically because they do not crack under pressure. Protocol severance was the internal operational code that Musk and his most trusted inner circle had developed beginning in May 2025, the month it became definitively clear to him that the European Commission was not interested in any outcome that involved negotiation, compromise, or a settlement that left X operating in Europe under conditions he could accept. Brussels wanted control, not regulatory compliance in the normal sense of adjusted algorithms and improved transparency reports, actual operational control. Government-appointed officials sitting inside his company with the legal authority to decide what his platform's users were permitted to say. And the moment Musk understood that was the actual destination Brussels was navigating toward, he stopped thinking about how to avoid the confrontation and started thinking about how to win it on terms that would matter beyond this specific dispute. The plan that emerged from those 7 months of preparation was not reactive and it was not emotional. It was a coldly engineered strategic operation built with the same obsessive attention to precision that Musk had applied to every genuinely difficult problem he had decided to solve across his career. Every technical obstacle had been identified, examined, and resolved. Every financial consequence had been calculated to the exact dollar. Every possible governmental response had been